T-minus 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey folks, welcome to the Launch Sequence podcast. We've got an episode for you here today. It's summer. You know how summers are for gaming in general, but Star Citizen, we've got our moments. And this year has been a year of expectations set by none other than CIG themselves. So today we're going to talk about Star Citizen, the state of people's feelings surrounding the game, and where things might go for the rest of the year that could help to make things a little bit better. I've got good friend and repeat guest here, Farrister. Usually I like to bring this man on to talk about ships. He's got great ship videos on his own YouTube channel, but today we're diving a little bit more meta. Thank you for joining me today, man. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm not going to rule out that we might talk about ships.
We'll probably talk about ships. It happens.
It happens.
How have things been for you so far this summer in terms of Star Citizen and covering it for YouTube? You've been covering it for about as long as I have, I think, about 4 years.
Well, those for me are two different questions. So the first question to me is, how has Star Citizen been for me this summer? And the answer is fine, because I've not been playing PTU. I've just been playing the PU in 3.23, and it's been relatively stable compared to some previous patches. So I've been enjoying just playing the game. The second part of the question is, how has it been as somebody making YouTube videos, and you see an inevitable drop in interest as we get into this period. It happens every single year, and for me this year has been no different there. So the channel is definitely in a summer lull, but I'm also really grateful that there are still people who watch videos thousands of times during this quiet time. So I'm trying to keep optimistic as well about the dedicated audience that do stick around.
Still plenty of people tuning into things, and I think that's, there will always be people who are interested in Star Citizen, but certainly a lot of maybe more casual viewers or people who have got their eyes on other games or on the outside world, that mythical land, do end up splitting their time a lot more over the summer. When it comes to the things you're talking about in Star Citizen, have you noticed that there's more people specifically looking at other stuff, and then like the numbers sort of drop off when it comes to different types of videos?
It's probably difficult for me to say. I mean, I think when you see a patch cycle like this, people are always very hyped up for the next big thing. So just through some of the analytics, I haven't made any videos about PTU or 324 or what's coming up, but YouTube really wants me to because I see it in the analytics. So that definitely seems to be popular. People just want progress, I think.
It's been a long patch cycle. Do you remember when we went into Evocati for 324?
I don't remember.
I think it was I might have been end of June or early July, but it has been a long PTU cycle now.
I think it was in May when they said, oh, there is going to be a 324, but don't worry, it's not going to be far away.
Yeah. The first couple statements were something like, we've almost got the hangars ready. We've just got some edge cases to figure out in terms of pushing it to another patch. How do you feel about that statement now? I think we're almost 4 months now, 3.5 months. No, it'll be 4 months. I believe in like 4 days since that statement was made, that the hangars, freight elevators, and inventory stuff was just kind of dealing with edge cases before it needed to be pushed out to testing. What do you think of that now with some retrospective?
Well, I think the other one I heard, I think it was something along the lines of, we're talking weeks, not months. But, well, we'll see. I've been around for a while now with Star Citizen, so I am incredibly suspicious, incredibly cynical until it's live. So, honestly, I'm not surprised at this point.
It's kind of funny because we've been doing the YouTube stuff about the same amount of time for Star Citizen, and I'm still just so optimistic. I mean, I'm not surprised when there are delays, and I expect delays, and the things that they tell us, I do think are way more optimistic than they should be. But I'm still a sucker for, maybe taking them at their word and then adding on another 10 to 20%. But really, it should be like a 50% addition of time whenever you hear CIG say something about deadlines. And that's not to say that that's any different from other game companies. It's just that we don't get that generally from other game companies. Like, there are a lot of early access games where that kind of stuff happens. One of my favorites, actually, Satisfactory, is about to hit 1.0 next month. But yeah, I still end up not doing a great job of predicting that stuff. Do you have any other early access games that you follow? Is there messaging and deadline missing the same?
Well, not really. I think the only other one that I kind of actively followed has been a tiny game called Icarus on Steam. And that's been quite the opposite. Like, the pace of things being implemented there has been really quick and the communication has been good. I don't think it is unreasonable to be disappointed when the developers come out and say, hey, look, this is just around the corner, it's not going to be long, and then that corner is looking further and further away. I think that's a very reasonable perspective to be disappointed at that. I've been through it too many times now that I'm happy when they say things are going to be soon, but I don't fully believe it until it's in my hands.
Mm-hmm. So there are a couple different takes on how the interest sort of hits a lull in the summer. And I think it's interesting to look at where the interest is and what that means for the game. So my take is generally that people will stop playing the game as much and do more kind of passive watching and following, watching it on Twitch, maybe catching a YouTube video here and there. But there is also a persistent view that generally people are just completely leaving Star Citizen and not really looking back. Have you encountered either of these takes, maybe personally? Like, have you talked to people and have they told you that they're just straight up leaving the game, or that they're taking a break, or what's the general consensus that you find?
So I have a view on this. I think for a lot of Star Citizen players, there is a cycle that you go through, right? So you start out reading about Star Citizen, and this thing is incredible. It's going to do everything. It's going to do absolutely everything you could possibly want in a sci-fi video game. You can explore, you can fight, you can do mining, you can do cargo trading.
It's going to cure your sicknesses.
You can do whatever and you can be whatever. And you read about it and you find out that it's going to be out soon and you can play something already and it sounds incredible. And then you go and you start reading up more, and there's all this stuff that's going to be added to the game, and it's going to be even better, and that's coming soon as well. And then maybe you tune into some citizen cons to see some extra stuff that's going to be developed, and quite often it looks great in engine already, so that's probably going to be soon, right? And then you go through some patch cycles, and they add things to the game, and you get into that initial period of, wow, Star Citizen is incredible. I'm so excited for it. It's coming soon. And then you get a few years down the line and that polish starts to wear off. You kind of get into that, well, I've heard all this before. It's been a few years and I'm still waiting for gameplay that I'm interested in, or a ship that I'm interested in to be added. And you start to become a little bit less excited about every time they say, look what's coming soon. And I think the challenge is we've had some really big content creators that have joined the Star Citizen scene who are now getting to that part of the journey. And there's only so many times you can be really excited about a future that's coming soon that you're still waiting for. And I think what we're seeing now is that as Star Citizen has really grown and snowballed over the years, there are more and more people who are in that stage of the cycle who are waiting for their favorite ship, who are waiting for specific gameplay, and understandably are fed up of waiting. So maybe they'll say, look, I'm going to step away, or look, I'll come back when this is added. And I think that's reasonable. I don't think it's unfair for those people. I don't think they set unrealistic expectations about what they wanted, because they'll have set them from what the developers said. But I think what where we're at now is we've got more and more people who fit into that camp, who are waiting for the next thing, and it's not necessarily going to be soon.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I don't think anybody's going to really deny that Star Citizen is very good at marketing. And they are a victim of their own marketing in the fact that like it just gets ahead of them. Everything that happens, everything that comes out is hyped, is messaged to the public, is talked about to no end. I mean, we're on year four of the road to Pyro. Like, there's a lot of jokes in the community that are just based on how much messaging there is that ends up being a little bit inaccurate. And I think they had their best marketing ever at last CitizenCon. They released their Star Engine trailer. It looked great. I think it's now the most viewed YouTube video that has to do with Star Citizen out there, besides maybe, one of the really good gameplay videos somebody's made. And they followed that up with a lot of Squadron 42 stuff, with a lot of talking about new features and things coming out. And then in December, having an ISC that ended with, inside Star Citizen, for those who don't know, that ended with talk of, the preview channel, and these are the new features coming with that preview channel, and they'll be getting tested here and there throughout the year. And we are now in month 8 of 2024. And a lot of that stuff, while it's in the game, I think the release of those things was a little bit tainted by both delays and what we're now seeing of 324 being like taken out of 323. So that whole situation, the marketing combined with the actual feet on the ground, my brain is still cobwebs from waking up. The actual production of those features has given people a little bit of a disconnect. And I think it's been additionally disappointing because, like you said, summer usually is a time when there's a lull. But they really set expectations this year. And I think that's started to hit people, not just people who have been here for a couple of years, but also people who only just got in, because last year with CitizenCon, new audiences were reached. Like you said, with new streamers and big creators picking this game up over the last 6 months, new people have started to get eyes on the game. It's become more public. And we're now seeing what happens when the game performs as it normally does, but maybe with a new, more expectant audience.
Yeah, so I have a similar but slightly different take. So if I summarize one of the things that you said there, it's that they really promised a lot at CitizenCon and they've under-delivered over the course of the year. For me, that is not new, right? That happens every single year. Yeah. I think what is slightly different this year is what they showed at CitizenCon last year was all game stuff. So it wasn't like, here's a pre-rendered sandworm or anything like that. This is stuff that's happening in the game, and this is all stuff that we're expecting that you will see before the next CitizenCon. And in many cases, they said this is stuff we expect you to see in the early part of 2024. Yeah. Well, here we are. We are 2 months away from CitizenCon now. So in a pure time perspective, they are 85% of the way along the journey of before next CitizenCon. We still don't have Pyro, right? I enjoyed stepping into Pyro shortly after CitizenCon last year. It was really cool to walk around and see, but we still don't have it live in the PU. We're still missing a lot of the stuff that they talked about delivering. And there'll be people as well who derive things from the presentation last year that will make assumptions off the back of that. So, for example, you've had some great videos out on YouTube this week around base building, and at the CitizenCon panel, they ended their big presentation on all the base building stuff with, and we're starting work on this in Q1 2024.
Didn't need to say that.
I've been around for long enough to read the first part of that, which is we're starting this in Q1 2024. So I'm like, okay, so you'll be finished in a few years then. But there'll be people that saw that and think, oh, well, if they're starting in Q1, like, and they've already got all this design stuff fleshed out, then surely it's not going to be long for that. And this whole CitizenCon theme is about stuff that we'll be seeing very, very shortly in game. So presumably that's, well, I think that's part of the reason why, is because they set a very different tone at the last CitizenCon. I remember actually joining this podcast shortly afterwards. I think Salty Mike was there. I think maybe Hybrid was there. And we were talking about how CitizenCon 2953 felt very different because it was grounded in gameplay, grounded in the tangibles, and Squadron 42, fair enough. And there's so much of that that hasn't actually hit the ground yet. And so I think it's understandable that people are a little frustrated.
Yeah. Like you said, CitizenCon always sets expectations. But this was, I think they've gotten like slowly and incrementally better over the last couple of years. This was a CitizenCon that was it felt much more realistic. Like you said, lots of gameplay, lots of actual in-engine demonstrations, things that, and most of the stuff that they showed gameplay and in-engine has made it into the game. The UI stuff, the map, some of the interaction stuff. But then, like, there's also parts of that haven't. The actual physical interaction, the quantum travel system. These are things that, you know, I think players expected to see quickly because of that. And the specific format of that CitizenCon, while it was very, very nice to get stuff that was actually presented to us, it's not just frustrating to players that it hasn't been in the game. I think it's also a little frustrating that it hasn't really been talked about, you know? Like, it was said that these things would be in the preview channel and stuff, but then also Star Citizen is no longer getting sprint reports on Inside Star Citizen. I think that's both a good thing and a bad thing for them. It's good because now they're not really showing us things that are farther out in Inside Star Citizen. A lot of people remember, like, we saw the Apollo in a sprint report last year. I don't even think that's in production right now. But at the same time, now we're also not really hearing about things that are a few quarters out. We're only hearing about things in the next update. So then you have people, you're like, okay, well, is the quantum travel rework still even planned for this year? Is that going to fix this system that we're all still dealing with? Because, you know, the new UI and the new map is great, but at the end of the day, the quantum travel system is still giving us issues. And it's those kinds of little things, these bugs here and incomplete features there, that I think CitizenCon last year started to give people a little bit of hope that it would start to be tightened up because of all that Squadron stuff coming over. That really hasn't happened as much as expected.
I think that's a fair point of view. And I think the other frustration with some of these things is that there's clearly an element of prioritization that has to happen. So you talked about the Apollo. I think the Apollo is, and I say this cautiously because I'm not a game developer, I think the Apollo is a fairly straightforward thing for them to build, right? Because it's just some modeling work, some detailing work, lighting, FX, the medical stuff that it's going to be doing. They could have it doing a basic element of that, like the Cutlass Red or the C8R, fairly simply. So for me, it's mostly model building for the Apollo and then testing and balancing. Mm-hmm. And I think that is literally just man hours or person hours to actually build and do. The challenge is probably that those people are working on something else because they need to be working on something else. There are far more complicated things that need fleshing out that probably take a lot more resource to do. So I think shipbuilding, where they step away from building some of the smaller ships, like, I don't know, the E1 Spirit or the Zeus or the Apollo, or things that aren't necessarily in our hangar yet, but in some cases might be soon. I think they're actually fairly straightforward because they're quite quantifiable tasks for CIG at this point. They've got a fairly robust ship pipeline. The fact that we don't have those means that there's a conscious decision that resource is going somewhere else. So whether that's working on bigger ships or new manufacturers or other gameplay critical elements, the challenge that we've got is we don't really know. We don't know what people are working on. You know, I have no doubt that if CIG said, hey, the Apollo is really important to us, we're going to ship before the end of this year, they could ship it before the end of this year, and it will be in a good state, and it will
Yeah.
be properly done, and it'll be polished. But it's clearly not a priority for reason X, Y, Z. We just don't know what that is.
I don't think it's I don't think it's crazy that the Apollo is not being worked on as an RSI ship, but they are working on RSI ship series. I can absolutely understand those people are working on getting together the Polaris, making sure that they're building assets that can be used then in the Galaxy or the Perseus, and working their way down to do, have more stuff that rolls over to help them build more of those smaller ships. But that again is a product of their kind of marketing style. They talk about the things that they're working on, and then those things that they work on shift in priority, and we get kind of left out in the dust, not knowing why that is. For not to say that they need to tell us every single thing that's happening, but the style of development that Star Citizen has followed has been slowly ratcheted back over the years. A lot of people probably will say that it started for them, at least visibly, with the roadmap being pulled back. But then a lot of things changed. Bug smashers had to be, scaled back a while ago. Around the Verse turned to Inside Star Citizen, whereas before it was a lot more about studio updates and everything that studio is working on. Now it's more about specific subjects or the next patch, and we've seen more and more scaling back of communication. Not necessarily, I think, in the overall amount of communication, but in the way that it's delivered. And that's both helped them because they've gotten away from situations like what we're talking about, but it also means, like I said, it leaves players a little bit more in flux, in confusion of what's actually coming in the next year or two. And that we always go back to the fact that this might be a product of open development, of game development being complicated and difficult, but it still doesn't change the fact that the way they talk about the game, I think at least, adds on to the frustration people have when the game is in the state it is.
I think definitely that's true, and I don't think there's an easy answer to it, because we've seen a situation where they were very open about development and it attracted criticism for delays, and now we're in a situation where they're much more closed around the development process and it attracts criticism for delays. Yeah. So they do one big citizen con where they say, look, we're taking your feedback, we're not showing any sandworms, we're just going to show stuff that is grounded in what's in active development right now, and everybody loses their mind over it because it's so exciting and it's tangible, and then there are delays. So I don't think there is a way that they can win. If they want the publicity, the only way that they're going to get a positive reaction out of it in the long run is to deliver.
It unfortunately always comes back to Squadron 42 for me. That game, I think that game needed to be released earlier. It clearly is taking a lot of their production funds and time. We've seen it even this year with the way that they wanted to start to shift more and more work from Squadron 42 towards Star Citizen, not necessarily from the engine or anything like that, but specific gameplay, things that we might do in Star Citizen that we wouldn't do in Squadron. And even some devs are, giving the impression that while they've gotten to work more on Star Citizen, there are still things that they have to then go and transition back over to Squadron 42 in order to polish up and make sure it's actually working correctly. And I'm not a game dev either, but I can imagine that trying to balance two different projects, they are very connected, but trying to work on those two different projects in different environments can cause probably a lot of slowdowns, scheduling issues, and just you got to shift your mindset, when you're trying to switch over from something to another thing like that. And I imagine that's the kind of problem that something like Grand Theft Auto 6 probably also runs into, where they're trying to do a big career-focused, story-based, open-world game, and also they're trying to make what is the real cash cow for them, which is Grand Theft Auto Online. And that's why we're now seeing a lot of rhetoric and conversation surrounding that game, how it's taken 10 years to make and $2 billion and all this stuff. And there's a lot of why? And I think creating two projects like this that are quite a bit different in their infrastructure can be a big hindrance when it's the same team working on those two games.
I think it can be, but I also think it makes sense the way that they've done it, because they want to deliver a real immersive story experience, and they also want to deliver the almost sandbox that you can be who you want to be. And I think both of those are valuable, and within the same IP and having a linked experience kind of makes sense to me. I think where the dichotomy comes in is what order do you do those in? And if you ask different people different questions, they would say, I want Squadron first, or I want Star Citizen first, and then you can do the other one. And I think the challenge that you've got is, in the Star Citizen community at the moment, I think Squadron has mass market appeal. You've got A-list celebrities doing voice work and some of the motion capture stuff. You've got potentially an incredible story behind it. So I think in terms of reaching a really wide audience who like to pick up a game and then put down a game, Squadron has got that mass market appeal. I think Star Citizen has more potential, and I think Star Citizen will do something that has never been done to an extent that I don't think Squadron will reach that, because it's going to be more on rails, right?
Yeah.
But I think the challenge you've got at the moment is, I think most of the people who follow Star Citizen follow for the PU Star Citizen MMO type experience. So I think if you asked most people, would you rather have all of the features that you ever wanted in the PU tomorrow, or would you rather be able to play Squadron 42 tomorrow? They'd say, no, I'm here for the PU, thanks.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's what's causing a lot of the challenge, is that all those resources going over to Squadron, I think the real audience for Squadron isn't aware of Squadron yet. And they won't be until it's launched and marketed and everything like that. Whereas the audience for Star Citizen is here now, today. They've probably been playing the game for 5 years and are a bit fed up at the slow progress. And they're quite rightfully saying, why is Squadron 42 getting all the attention? It's like the younger sibling, and they come along and the parents love them so much, and I'm not getting any attention anymore. And I think that's an understandable reaction. You know, I recently did a video on YouTube because I've just passed 10 years since I bought my first Star Citizen ship. And I have some old screenshots from Squadron 42 saying, this is going to be released in 2016, and that's from the end
Answer the call, man.
Answer the Call 2017. That's from the website. That's from an official video. You know, so I don't think it's unreasonable. Here we are, 7 years later. I think it's safe to say Squadron probably has another year to bake. Who knows? We might get a release date at CitizenCon, but there's still obviously more to be done. And so we're a long way along that journey. And so I think it's quite understandable that people would feel a little bit miffed that, hey, I'm here for Star Citizen, you know, great for Squadron 42, but stop sending developers over there. I want to see improvements in the PU. I want to see bug fixes. I want to see the drones working on my Carrack or whatever it is. I don't think that's unreasonable for people to say.
Yeah, man, that's one of the biggest things with this, and I don't blame people either. Like you said, 2017 answered the call, 2016 answered the call, 2020 we're going to beta, all this stuff. And at the end of the day, people, like, this is the problem for Star Citizen. I think I'm going to make a video about this later this year. I'm very conscious of how I want to name this video, because I have a point to make, but it can be very inflammatory. And that is that when people talk about Star Citizen being a scam, it's not. But Squadron 42, it uses a lot of the money that people put into Star Citizen. And many of the people who put that money into Star Citizen, like you said, don't even know Squadron 42 exists. So where is the line there for what you're funding based on what people want and where the money is supposed to be going? Because I do understand that Star Citizen will not survive if Squadron 42 isn't released as a success and brings in a large cash flow. You can see from the way that they've expanded their teams, they've developed the studios, they've built the engine, all this stuff. They're expecting a big influx of cash from Squadron 42 to help Star Citizen continue. Star Citizen then being a full game that can regularly bring in cash would predictably help to drive Squadron 42 sequels and a give and take relationship like that. But like, if you take too long on Squadron 42, then things start to get a lot stretched out. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing.
I think so. And look, from a business perspective, I think what they're doing makes sense. You grab that squadron, which is a neat self-contained package. You can potentially get that quite bug-free, he says very cautiously, but you could potentially get something that is much more polished. It's going to be on rails, so there's going to be fewer random edge cases, and it'll still be pretty epic, and that would bring a big cash boost into the project, would bring a lot of interest into the project. So it makes sense from a business perspective to do it that way around. However, if you're a backer and you don't really care that much for Squadron 42 and you're really here for the PU experience, you don't really care about the business perspective. You want the game that you fell in love with. So I think it's a difficult situation. Same as everything else, I think the one thing that will address people's concerns is tangible progress in our hands that we can play. So whether that's Squadron 42 this is the release date, this is when it's happening, this is the absolute, we're shipping on this date. Whether that's actually seeing some of these bug fixes and improvements that people have been complaining about, even if it's a simple case of delivering some of the ships where the gameplay is already there, like the Apollo that we talked about. You've got fewer and fewer players who are waiting for something then, and there's no way to sidestep that. Actual delivery is what's needed.
Speaking of the Apollo, I do think drones probably are holding that ship up.
Really?
Yeah, because I think that there are a couple ships that probably depend on drones, and I remember a couple years ago, John Crew was saying they were developing drones for Squadron 42, and they would want to get a working model in Star Citizen as well, but I doubt they have. I mean, we see how the servers perform. I think they don't want to release ships like that unless the drones that work with them are working in some way, but maybe not.
Maybe not. I mean,
that ship without drones, like you said, would make it a Cutlass Red, essentially, like a bigger Cutlass.
It would, and we have lots of ships that are like that are still useful. So we have a Mercury Star Runner with lots of servers that just have nice, pretty lights on them, and a little scanning turret that I'm still not convinced does anything at all. We've got other ships that have drones that don't have drones that we have now already live in the PU. So I think Carrack, Reclaimer. So I don't think it will be game breaking to say, hey, here's Apollo 0.5. It's working. There's a med bed. You can fly it around. It looks incredible because, by the way, the model does look incredible. But there are no drones yet. We'll add that later.
Those all came out, though, before. I think it was Ellen Batchelor Jr. came on camera in like 2021 maybe, or 2020, and said, I think it was around February or something, one of those years, and said they didn't want to release ships without their main function, which is iffy, because like we had the Raft well before it could do its true physical cargo hauling. We've gotten a couple ships like the 400i and Explorer ships that it's like, okay, what's exploration? They can't do it. Does that count? Kind of stuff. But there's definitely a slowdown in the way they were releasing long-term usable ships after that period of time. And I think that might be where the Apollo got caught up. But who knows?
And I think there are different layers to that, right? So to me, there's no point in releasing a Crucible without repair. There's no point in releasing a Vulcan without the drones, because that is the thing that the ship does. Mm-hmm. But you could release an Apollo tomorrow, and it would do the same thing as the other medical ships in the game do currently. So it would be half there. It'd be sort of functional. So I think there are varying degrees to which you could say we're not going to release. But again, it comes back to, if you want to make the statement that says we're only going to release ships when they have their gameplay attached, I'd still like you to release ships. So do the gameplay and make it work. But again, we're in a situation of delay and delay and delay, where making that statement just means we're not going to release ships, rather than we're going to deliver gameplay, which is what people really want.
Yeah. And obviously they're still releasing ships. That's also a big problem for a lot of people. Oh, stop releasing ships. I don't care about ships. Just make the game more stable, that kind of thing. Do you think that it would make the process any better or worse if they stopped releasing ships at this point?
I think there's a catch-22 because people want to see the progress. They want to see their ship in game, but also the project is probably aware that new ships generate a lot of interest, and it does. And we as the community need to take ownership of that fact. You know, everybody that's complaining, don't release new ships, and you see this a lot, don't release new ships. Ultimately, people are buying these things, and actually some of them are quite good. I picked up a C1 Spirit. I don't know if I'd call it a new ship anymore, but it's one of the newer ships, and it's great. I love
that
it.
ship. Yeah.
Exactly. So, you know, I think there is a lot of room for all sorts of different ships in the verse, and I think there's a lot of empty space that they could continue to add new things. I think the challenge for me would be you need to deliver some of that backlog, because there are people that have been waiting for 10 plus years for some of the ships in their hangar. And yes, there's a really important thing that some of those will need gameplay attached to them. But to be fair, mining has been pretty good. Salvage has been pretty good. Cargo hauling has been pretty good, albeit he says that very carefully with 324 just around the corner. So they have, over the past few years, brought in some big gameplay loops, and I think it'd be good to see both moving forward.
So that's actually a good point. You brought up the C1 Spirit and different ships that are coming in that can take advantage of gameplay. And another thing besides just bringing in new ships that I think people really can get you bothered is that old ships need some clear updates. And one of the problems, one of the things that I have seen, and we're going to get into 324 and simplifying gameplay and all that here, because there have been so many people now talking about, you gotten rid of local inventories, you've gotten rid of my ability to easily, you know, move stuff back and forth and all that. And one of the things that is supposed to help with that is that ships have internal inventories, but most of them don't. And the ones that do, a lot of their spaces are just too small to carry a lot of stuff. Now, you can have containers on your ship where you store your stuff. You can just throw stuff into the cargo bay on your ship and just let it hang out there loose. But overall, it kind of points to the problem that there are a lot of ships in Star Citizen that may work well, that may get the job done, but they're not up to date. They're not gold standard. They don't take advantage of everything the game has to offer. And I think that also is starting to weigh a lot on people's minds, especially as they continue to see these new ships with these features coming out. What's your view on that as somebody, I think, who covers a lot of ship stuff on your channel?
I think this is another victim of time, right? So the ships that are dated now were great in 2015. Some of the next ships along were great when they launched in 2018, right? And they fit the design brief of the time. So I think the challenge that we've got is, as some of this stuff evolves, the needs of those ships is changing. So if I take, for example, the Hercules, which is a ship that I know quite well, a great big cargo hauler. Hercules is really smart because they've got a bottom cargo deck, which has got your cargo grids, and you can attach all the boxes or chairs or bring your ground vehicles or whatever you want in that bottom area. Then on the upper deck, you've got all of the ship gubbins and things that make things happen. So you've got all your component access, suits, storage, this, that, and the other. That was clearly designed with a view to say, well, we've got all these cargo bins like you'd find on an airliner, and that's where you'll put all of your little stuff. And then you've got the cargo bay down below for the big stuff. And then here's some suit lockers and your component access. That, for me, at time of release, made every bit of sense, right? Everything that the way that is laid out is really future-proof, because if you need to fix a component or change a fuse or anything like that, it makes sense. And it was actually, well, the A2 was actually the test case, wasn't it, for some of the engineering stuff in Arena Commander.
Yep.
I don't know whether that will stand the test of time. With some of the stuff that is currently happening with 324, I don't know how well the Hercules will stand up to some of those changes. So this was a ship that I would have said, when it was released, was the absolute gold standard in being future-proofed, and here we are a few years on, and I'm not sure that's still the case. So I think this is another challenge of just how long development is taking and how things are changing, is you end up in a situation where, as much as you've tried to plan for the future, you've changed things so much that those plans may not be accurate anymore.
And just to be clear, you're not necessarily changed in the sense that they have pivoted from what they wanted to do. You just mean changes in like they've brought in the features they had planned, and those things have to be implemented in ways that might be a little bit different than the ships they made.
Yeah, well, I think there has been a change,
Okay.
but the change is just they had an idea before of what they wanted, and as soon as you've got an idea, you can try and plan for that. But then when you actually need to make it work in the game,
Yeah.
things change and things feel a bit different. So I think these ships were designed on the basis of an idea of where inventory management was going. And when I say these ships, some of these ships, like the Hercules generation for me, are those ships that were designed around the idea of what's going to happen. And then obviously, as we get into 324, things are a bit different to that. But we've seen this before, right? So we've seen over the years various iterations of inventory, and some people liked how it was then, and some people liked how it is now, and some people will like how it might be in the future. But I think it's the inevitable consequence of stretching out development over a number of years that some of the stuff that's earlier on in that pipeline is not going to stand up quite so well to those changes.
Speaking of inventory, let's talk about that. One of the things that I think is starting to frustrate a lot of players, and this could be a new player versus old player kind of thing. This could be a simulation versus quote unquote arcadey player kind of thing. I'm interested in where you think the split is, but a lot of people like the idea of the physical interaction of this game, though at least the direction it's going in, from having to engineer your ship to keep it working in the larger sense of things, to moving boxes from one point to another in order to transfer your stuff. Many people feel like the game is including time sinks just to kind of waste time. Many people feel like the time sinks are good but could be simplified. Let's take the changes in 324 as an example and go from there. Physical cargo and physicalized inventory, the idea that you need to be in a physical place to retrieve stuff. What is your take on that? Do you think that they need to start to hold back on this kind of stuff and maybe simplify the game more? Or do you feel like they're still going in the direction that you at least wanted to see with the game?
I think people will have different views on this, and I don't think there's necessarily one right view or one wrong view. It probably depends on what you want from the game. So we will take physicalized cargo, but I think it's probably important to point out as well, these time sinks are not new. Anybody who has ever traveled anywhere in Star Citizen using a Bolon quantum drive will know that quantum travel is already a time sink, right? So we have had these things in game. It's just not necessarily an active one. In terms of the inventory management, you would probably be the first one to point out to me that this is something that they've said for many years. This is the direction of travel. Everything is going to be physicalized. You are going to be moving stuff, or you're going to be getting NPCs to move stuff or automation to move stuff. But that's, for many people, the appeal of how things are going to be. But I think if you are interested in bunker running and that side of things, you probably don't really care that much about moving boxes. I think if you're really interested in medical gameplay, you probably don't really care that much about moving boxes. So for those people that want to do what they want to do, it's probably more of an inconvenience. It feels like an extra roadblock in their way. Whereas if your idea about what you want to do in the verse is you want to be a space trucker and you want to equip your Bolon quantum drive and watch some videos while you're floating through space, and then when you get to the other side, you're going to physically move all the boxes, and yeah, you could get NPCs to do that, or actually you might quite enjoy doing it yourself, then it's probably quite an exciting thing that you're starting to get closer to that vision that you had. I think all of those are valid. I think for me, the key question about time sinks is it an unnecessary or cumbersome blocker to helping people do the stuff they want to do? So for me, all of the physicalized stuff makes a lot of sense for cargo gameplay, for cargo haulers. You give them the option to say you can do it yourself and you can play your space Tetris and move things around, or you can get an NPC to help moving things around. Whichever you prefer, you could do that. But the challenge for me is going to be making sure that those players who want to go out bunker running, or who want to go out doing medical stuff, who want to just get their ship fixed up and out in fighting some bounty hunters or whatever it is, that it's not it's not too cumbersome that it becomes a real turn off for those players wanting to do that.
Well, let's flip the script. So this is clearly, as you said, it's something that people might care more about when they're looking at a specific type of gameplay, and those knock-ons then affect other people. So let's talk about somebody else you mentioned there, medical players. Medical players might want there to be more opportunities for you to go down but not die, more opportunities to get injured, a deeper health system, and going a step further, survivalists, people who want to see space survival gameplay, which has been talked about a lot in this game, from weather systems to eating and drinking to, again, those injuries that you can take, to even small forms of base building, you know, repairing your ship after you've crash landed on a planet. All of these are things that they may or may not have talked about that have drawn people to the game and get them more excited. So building that gameplay out for those people then might have an effect on others. Specifically, I think eating and drinking is something that a lot of people are like, why do I have to do this in this game? Whereas people who might be more interested in survival or just in role playing are thinking, yeah, this is cool. I like the fact that I have to maintain my character's health. Should those people's gameplay be simplified for the sake of everybody else who doesn't want those roll-on or knock-on effects in their own gameplay?
It's a good question. It's all a fine balancing act. I mean, I care not for eating or drinking. For me, it is an inconvenience. But I have to be fair, it's not a major inconvenience. It is not difficult to, every time you get to a station, just quickly grab a hot dog and a drink, right? It takes less than a minute. So for me, I don't care about it. It's not important to me as a player. That's not to say that I don't respect the people that it is important for, but for me personally, it's not. But there isn't a significant roadblock in the way for me for having that, right? It's a minor inconvenience. You get a good long warning about when things are kind of getting into a dire situation, and inevitably, if you're in a group anyway, somebody remembered to bring a biscuit or whatever. So I don't think that's a major inconvenience, but it just depends on it depends on how much time you have to spend managing these things. You know, there are understandably some people who have played Star Citizen in the past who felt that it was too onerous to get on the space tram at New Babbage and go all the way to the spaceport because it takes 5 minutes every time you log in just to get into your ship. Again, I think for those of us that play Star Citizen every week, we're so used to that now that we're conditioned to it. But actually, if you just want to get in and fly and go and do something, that is 5 minutes every session that you've got to add to kind of get to your ship. And there are ways around that. You know, you can park your ship in places where there's no internal transit and the travel time is reduced. But all of these things are already in the game as essentially barriers. For the people that like the realism, I think that probably fits really well. But you know, I can understand that people be frustrated about all of these time sinks, all of these roadblocks, all of these things that are stopping you from getting to the gameplay that you really want to be experiencing.
But then, like you said, there are ways around that. And I think that's another thing that's really starting to be missed. And this is a product of CIG's own communication, in that these are features that are coming in, even the manual loading that we're seeing in 324, the train rides in cities, the way inventory works. All of these are things that will have very easy and clear workarounds. One thing is the suit lockers, where you should, as from what they've said, be able to save your whole suit with the gadgets and stuff attached, and one click your loadout onto your body and not have to deal with an inventory. Or, like you said, park your ship somewhere where there is no city. Stay in a space station. Stay on your base in a planet. Stay on your spaceship floating out in space. Completely equipped, completely stocked up, ready to go, so that you log in and you have 2 minutes and you're in a mission. And those kinds of things get missed because CIG doesn't really tell people, hey, I know we're putting this stuff in the game, but these are things that are meant to literally guide you through the game to live and play in the way that you want to, so that some people can run into these things and other people can completely skip them. I know bed logging has been hit or miss for the last 5 to however many years, but the idea of bed logging has allowed a lot of people to not have to ever deal with a space station or city when they start playing. They just log in and get going. And I think being more clear about the fact that that's a possibility on CIG's end would help a lot of people understand that not necessarily simplifying the gameplay they're looking at is the answer. It's more giving you the ability to plan or strategize ahead to just avoid it.
I think it's a really good point. And let's say that, our person here is a bunker runner who needs their armor equipped and their weapons equipped and all their ammunition every time they want to run bunker. The end state that you've described there of, hey, well, you're on your, I don't know, Valkyrie or whatever it is that your bunker runners like to run, and you've got all of your stuff in there. You've got whole weapons lockers in the back so you can pick your shotgun or your sniper rifle, or like on the Matrix where he brings down all the guns. You've got everything on there that you could possibly want, and it all persists, and you can just go and sleep in a bed on the ship, and you wait back in and do what you want to do. I think that end state sounds great, but you also said yourself, bed logging has been hit or miss for a few years. I know from experience, sometimes you land your ship and indescribably it explodes for no reason, and so everything that was on there is lost. Yeah. And all of these things are kind of blockers to that as well. So I think there is a balance to be struck. There's a balance to be found, and I think as we get further along the journey and we've got a more reliable experience, a lot of these things will be worked through. But also, I think there's an element of, I can understand why people are frustrated while they're on that journey.
So do I. And that's why I think it comes down to, once again, a communication thing with CIG. And I want to stress as much as I can, if anybody from CIG is possibly listening to this, thank you, by the way, if you are, but we could really use some help in messaging that kind of stuff. That, like, the game that we are playing now is not the game they're making these features for. And while we obviously are all living in the game right now and we want to enjoy that, the design is outpacing the features. And if the features don't communicate those things to people and nobody else is telling them, these releases don't in any way say that these things are going to change, then people are going to sit with the expectation that this is how things will always be. That you will, every single time you play this game, you have to log in, go to a kiosk, get your inventory, equip all your stuff, put on your helmet, go get your ship, fly out to space, and spend 30 to 40 minutes just to get ready in the game. And like you said, then there's other complications to that. The fact that the game is so unstable, that you can crash, that your ship can explode, that little glitches can take you out of that experience. And those are hopefully things that they can iron out and make not take a ton of time, or make you feel like the things you're doing don't really matter to prepare for all of that. I would love to be able to store all of my food, all of my armor sets, my weapons, and all that stuff on my C1 or my Mercury Star Runner, and just know that over the course of the next few months, I'll never see a city, never see the inside of a train again. But I don't believe in that, because the game's not very stable.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair.
So in terms of stability, or sorry, not stability, gameplay and simplified gameplay, do you think that, I guess at the end of all of this, I ranted a little bit there, but at the end of all of this, do you think that they should stick their course on what they're doing, or should they start to pay more attention to what players are saying about what they like or don't like in these situations?
I think there needs to be an element of both, right? So the reason we are where we are with Star Citizen, for better or for worse, is because Chris Roberts had a vision for something that had never been done before. And that has been what has driven this project forward and delivered the level of hype. And it's also been what has been holding it back, right? So I think a good leader needs to be able to step out of line and say, this is not going to be popular at first, but this is the right direction. And that can be quite tough sometimes when you've got something where you say, this might feel a bit uncomfortable to begin with, but trust me, once we've got where we're going, it's going to be worth it. But also a good leader needs to be able to listen and respond to feedback. So I think there needs to be a very cautious balance between listening to what the players who play the game now want, but also knowing and being intuitive enough and bold enough to say, this might not be what you think you want, but it will be. I'm just chuckling because of WoW Classic. But a good leader for me has to have that fine balance of having a vision which might not be accessible, but also listening to people. I think the inventory stuff, I think we'll get there with it. I think it feels a bit janky at the moment in 3.24 because it's in PTU. right? And when has anything in PTU ever been really, really smooth to begin with? There are iterations, there are changes. You read the stuff on Spectrum, and actually, I think the developers are very aware that what is in there right now is not the end state. So I think as players, we need to be especially patient with that. For people that are watching PTU content or playing the PTU, it's PTU and not PU for a reason. That said, when this patch does land on the PU, I'm not expecting it to be plain sailing either. I think there will be challenges. I think there will be roadblocks. I think there will be some unpopular things. But to be fair, you've seen it with some of the other stuff. So Master Modes was not universally popular when that came in.
Or now.
Well, I don't think it's that bad, honestly.
I mean, hey, neither do I. But if there is one thing that I have started to, when it's kind of like going to Thanksgiving and wanting to have conversations with everybody, and there's one person who continues to bring up politics, and you're like, please just let us talk about other stuff. Master Modes is starting to get to that point for me, where I'm like, can we just talk about other things and just nonstop? People will continue to push the conversation on Master Modes, which I understand has its problems, but that is like, if there's anything more clear that there is a subset of people who will not let that go, it's Master Modes.
Yeah, and for me, it's an example of I remember reading about Master Mode. In fact, I saw Master Modes at CitizenCon, and I think it was one of the rare occasions I felt a need to make a video about it, because I said this could be disastrous, this could be awful, this could be terrible. And I know there are a lot of people that feel very strongly about Master Modes and the changes that it's made. I don't think it's that bad, right? In the grand scheme of things, whether you preferred the old system or not, I don't think it is awful. I don't think it's game-breakingly awful. You might have a preference for one system or the other, but ultimately, with what we have at the moment, I think the noise is bigger than the actual reality, if you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's always a more of a vocal minority with these kinds of things, and I do see a lot of the things that they're saying. I think it's, again, the design outpacing the features, in that there are a lot of things that need to be considered that Master Modes needed to do, like the speed of combat needed to be slowed down, for sure, to work along with capital ship gameplay, which Star Citizen has never been able to focus on until just now. And it makes sense that I think they released in 3.12 or something, 3.13, something like that. They released a couple different features that were meant to slow down combat organically and make players consider how fast they were flying, and that simply didn't happen. And I think at some point around 2021 or 2020, they internally accepted that they cannot make players slow down organically without adding in a ton of features and balance and stuff around power management and engineering. So they said, you know what, we're going to come up with something that is more artificial, which I don't like. Okay, that's hover mode energy for me. But they realized they needed to slow down combat because turrets and capital ships and the general balance of overall combat outside of just dogfighting needed that. And so I think now that we don't have that sort of overall combat with capital ships and larger ships and support and all that stuff, it feels really weird that Master Modes is doing what it does on its own. But I'm open to seeing if that works towards the future. Now, if it doesn't, I think they could be in a pretty bad spot, but they've made that call, and I think we won't know if it's a real success until those sorts of things start to get into the game.
But again, realistically, I'm really excited for cap ship combat, by the way. I'm really looking forward to being an engineer on one of these things and fixing it up whilst it's battling away. But realistically, how often are you going to be in capital ship combat in Star Citizen? I'd have thought the majority of engagements would be really small scale, fighter versus fighter, or fighter attacking a freighter, or something along those lines. I'd have thought that the capital ship combat, while epic when it does happen, would be more of the edge case.
I guess I don't necessarily mean capital. I mean multi-crew. Like if you're fighting against a constellation, I think Master Mode still really helps in a situation like that. And
yeah,
those are the kinds of things that you see in other space games get set up, from No Man's Sky to Starfield to Elite Dangerous. A lot of the battles you're getting in with PvE, at least, end up having some lopsided sort of ship sizes, because it makes for a good set piece. You know, you get dragged out of quantum travel or out of witch space or whatever it is. I think it's not witch space. I think it's just super cruise. Yeah. And suddenly there's like a freighter and it's getting attacked and there's a whole bunch of NPCs fighting and you have to jump into that battle. And like, that's a lot more fun if it's slowed down. And if you're on the other side of that in a ship where you're running crew or maybe running some missions, my dream of this game is that you can get onto a ship that is technically NPC controlled and run missions as like a turret gunner or an engineer or something. And in that situation, I would love if other ships that are attacking the ship are actually not flying at 1,000 meters per second, so I can't do anything against them.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And there's a balance to these things as well, because there will be the flight purists who say, hey, what I really liked about some of the early versions of this game was the idea that once you're in space and you're unconstrained by atmosphere, you can accelerate and your ship will keep accelerating and it will keep going at faster and faster speeds until you hit an asteroid or a planet or something. And I think we have lost that concept of true non-atmospheric 6 degrees of freedom, like you move your ship how you want to move your ship. The flight model that we have now is very different from the early flight model that we've had, and there'll be people that like that and people that don't like that. I do agree with you. From the perspective of a turret gunner, it's a necessary change, because there's no way you can hit a ship that's flying at 1,000 meters per second, really. But equally, from the perspective of if you bought an M50 and your whole idea was, I'm going to fly around really fast so that nobody can hit me, suddenly you're much more of a sitting duck now than you ever were. Yeah. So, I think this is the challenge of building a game for a universe of a whole plethora of different people, is there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to these problems.
That's it right there. And we were just talking about that too, with the cargo changes, the medical changes, all of that is like, they're trying to make gameplay that fits for so many different types of games. Really, it's like a lot of different games in one, that they end up stepping on each other's toes and causing the gameplay to be a little bit more limited for other people. Here we look at a relationship between turret gunners and dogfighters and how the gameplay for one can make it not as fun for the other.
Absolutely. And you see this playing out in so many different communities across Star Citizen already. So I think one of the highly publicized ones is PvP versus PvE, right? You get some very strong emotions on both sides of that. And that's because fundamentally at the extremes in those groups, and I have to stress, it is the extremes in those groups. I think the vast majority of PvE players are very reasonable. The vast majority of PvP players are very reasonable. These are the edge cases in each. But at the extremes of those groups, their view of what Star Citizen is and will be is so different that there isn't any common ground or crossover. And I think that's one of the challenges that we've got with a game that has been built as much as anything else on hype rather than actual gameplay. Is everybody reads the bits they want to read and makes the game in their head that they want to make. And so when things come along, get updated, like we were talking about the physicalized cargo, there'll be some people that never read anything about physicalized cargo because it wasn't what they cared about. And now that we're starting to see some of that coming in, they're thinking, oh, this is a bit inconvenient. Well, it was kind of always the plan, but you didn't read that because you were reading about something else that you wanted the game to be. And I think we will start to see more and more of these issues crop up as we do get steadily closer to a completed article, because people will be realizing, hey, this isn't what I signed up for. And you see it all over Twitter and Reddit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you see it a lot. I mean, it's almost like a reckoning. And I guess that's sort of every couple of months or every year when you hear that this is going to end up killing the game kind of thing.
And for some people it will, right? Yeah. For people who have an unrealistic vision of what Star Citizen is going to be, it will potentially kill the game for them. If you signed up for Star Citizen thinking that you're going to be on a happy Care Bear, everybody's friendly to each other, you hug everybody at a space station and nobody ever fights, and the weapons on your ship are really just decorative, then you're going to be disappointed. Equally, if you're expecting Star Citizen to be the Wild West, Tarkov in space, where anything goes and everywhere is lawless and anything is excusable, I think you're also going to be disappointed. So I think some of those people potentially do have unrealistic expectations, and I don't think that's necessarily their fault. You know, you and I could sit here and say, well, they should have read up more about the game and watched all of the videos. There's hundreds of hours of reading and development videos, many of which is contradictory to each other, because the studio is so big now that a developer statement is not what it used to be when it was just a handful of people. So I think it's completely understandable that people do have different visions of the game. And I think it is going to be a pinch point as we start to get closer to whatever a finished Star Citizen is going to be. And by the way, you know, I have to say, I've spent a lot of time reading up around the game. I've been here for 10 years. I don't fully know what to expect from the project anymore, right? I've got an open mind about stuff that I think will probably happen, but ultimately, until it's in our hands as a final finished, this has been design and gameplay and development all finished, you know, I don't truly 100% know how much of it we will get versus won't get and what that will look like.
Yeah, I've got some strong opinions on where the game should go based on what they've said in the past, but I do understand that things are going to change. Specifically, just this year, bed logging and the idea of how logging on and off can work, as well as Death of a Spaceman, have both seen some conversation and rhetoric that shows that they have plans to still follow the things that they wanted to do, but they have clearly accepted that the details need to change for the sake and the health of the game. And I get that. Like, there are some things that will probably make me like the game less and less, but overall the general idea of the game is what I'm looking for, and I don't think they could change that at this point. Like, they're so far into what this game is meant to be that some of the details will shift, but overall I'm just looking for, a cool space game with a lot of different environments to visit in a first person experience, and that's not super hard to, or super easy to find, which is probably why so many people are still sticking with this despite the long development time and maybe the not great expectations that get set.
But even then, I'm still not 100% clear on some important things, like let's say progression, right? So if we say, what is progression in Star Citizen? If you'd asked me that 10 years ago, I'd have said, oh, well, progression in Star Citizen is moving up to bigger ships and getting the next ship along, and that's the obvious thing that you do to get on. You get a new ship because that kind of unlocks the gameplay. You want to try mining, you need to get a prospector, so you unlock ships. You asked me 5 years ago, I'd have said, oh, it's probably going to be reputation, actually. I think that seems to be the way that they're going to be gatekeeping stuff, is via reputation system, and you will build your reputation in game, and that will be what unlocks the content for you. Then you get to some of the recent Citizen Cons, and they talk about, for the first time, things like skill points. And you're like, is that going to be the progression system? So even for me, as somebody who's been following the project for 10 years, I'm not 100% clear on what progression, if there even is going to be such a thing, in the game will look like.
I do still hope that really it hinges on reputation. I think that makes the most sense. It's not something that you can just buy on the store. It's not something that you can artificially bump up from doing something over and over in a game. Reputation seems like a really good way to go about it, so I hope that's where they stick to it. But let me ask you,
who knows?
Yeah. Let's go back real quick to that PvE PvP conversation. I want to finish this up talking about stability, which I think is one of the biggest things that's frustrating players. But before we get to that, I want to ask you about that PvE versus PvP stuff. A lot of this conversation has come up recently because Pyro is a dangerous system. Contested zones are clearly geared towards mixing some players and NPC enemies up and having some combat. And a lot of things focus on combat. I put a video up about this myself just a few weeks ago. A lot of things in this game focus on combat. Now, I think that's because of the development path they've taken. But a lot of people see this, and we have that same sort of issue that you mentioned with the cargo, that we have talked about when it comes to the different types of gameplay and how they've said these things, but they're only just now coming in. A lot of people feel like the game is turning into a PvP game, or it's becoming more cargo or combat focused. Do you think that they should be worried?
Maybe. So it depends on how pragmatic they are as an individual. I don't think the game is becoming more combat focused. I think we've probably got one of the least combat focused iterations of the game we've ever had. And I say this as somebody that's been playing the PU since it was first launched. And the reason that I say that is when the PU first came out, all there really was combat. Arguably, you could say there were kind of like these investigation things, but they usually had combat attached, right? So we went from a situation where all there was to do was combat, and now we've got mining, we've got salvage, we've got cargo hauling, we've got lots of non-combat options. The universe is a dangerous place, and some places are more dangerous than others. And I think that's what we're starting to see with this stuff about Pyro and kind of these contested zones, is Pyro is supposed to be more dangerous than Stanton. So if you are a peaceful player, I wouldn't be looking forward to Pyro that much, because it is badged up as it is supposed to be, by design, a more risky place. And I think if you are a pragmatic, peaceful player, honestly, you know, I started playing this game 10 years ago and I was all for combat. As I've got older, I'm much more interested in the non-combat elements. I love salvage. I like my cargo hauling. I quite like mining. And I didn't really expect that when I first started playing Star Citizen. But I accept if I'm going to be doing those things in Pyro, that is going to be a riskier place to do it than Stanton. It might be more profitable, but it might also be more risky. So I think if people are pragmatic and are starting to see with some of these new systems coming on, Pyro being the first, that potentially, yes, there are going to be differences between them. And that goes both ways, by the way. I don't think that hardcore PvP players should think that ganking people at Seraphim Station is going to be the way that they go in the future. You know, I think as long as people are pragmatic as to say there are going to be places where combat is more prevalent and there are going to be places where it's more peaceful, I think there's going to be room for everybody. But if you are a hardliner that says, no, I want everywhere to be peaceful, or no, I want everywhere to be lawless, then I think those people are going to be the ones that are disappointed.
I remember I was streaming a couple years ago and somebody came in and was very adamant that there should be essentially different servers for people who don't want to experience combat. And, you know, I don't think that, I think that goes against the game design. The idea of everybody kind of living amongst one another. But going back to what you said, I think there's also just the fact that this helps to push the economy, and maybe not having that simulation in economy does a lot to break this idea. But even going beyond just Pyro, mining in the Air and Halo belt should be safer than mining in the yellow asteroid belt, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's also a localized thing. It's a thing that we once again can't benefit from because development is behind the design, in that there's no security in this game. Stanton is actually supposed to be a fairly secure system where if you get attacked, whether it's an automatic beacon or just a beacon that you put out yourself, you should be able to get security coming through and helping you out pretty quickly, as opposed to somewhere like Pyro or even Nyx, where it can take longer or lag behind or not be there at all. Actually, we saw this in the base building presentation where they said high security systems, your base will never get attacked. You'll be completely safe. Low security systems, it's going to be iffy, so you kind of want to build stuff for yourself. And I think that same thing is going to play out in all of these different peaceful types of gameplay you're talking about in a system like Stanton or Castra or Terra, where there's high security. But they, once again, communication-wise, they haven't really made that clear to a lot of newer backers or people who haven't gotten to pay as much attention to what they used to say.
And to be fair, it's probably not practical to do that at the moment when everybody is in Stanton, because you've cooped up everybody together and kind of said, all gameplay is valid, you guys can work it out amongst yourselves. Well,
Like,
yes, but
oh God.
So everybody sees Stanton differently. I think we've talked about this before. There will be people that say, well, Stanton is the starter system, so it should be completely lawful and there should be no PvP at all. And there'll be others who say, well, Stanton is the only battleground that we've got right now, so anything goes. And it's difficult to differentiate when all you've got is Stanton. But I agree with you. You know, for example, we've got these, what are they called? The protected zones where you spawn in at Seraphim and nobody can shoot you. Armistice zones, that's the word I'm looking for. So you've got these armistice zones. I think when we get further along, armistice zones will not be necessary. And this might be controversial, but I think if you've got all those systems in place, then if you log in at Seraphim Station and a guy punches you, they get instantly arrested by the security guards. Yeah. Or you log in at Seraphim Station and somebody starts shooting at you on the pad. Well, all of those turrets, if they're actually accurate for a change, suddenly turn around and blast that person out of the sky. That's an in-game consequence for an in-game action. And so suddenly people are stopping talking about, oh, this person is griefing, because hey, guess what? They're in Klesher for the next 2 weeks. And as soon as those consequences exist for players who are perhaps pushing the boundaries about what is acceptable in Seraphim, actually, I think people will be less concerned. You know, for me personally, I hated the pad rammers of yesteryear. But I'd probably be okay with it if I knew that that pad rammer was going to be in Klesher for the next week. You know, I lost 5 minutes. I lost 2 weeks. I'm cool with that. But the challenge we've got at the moment is that those consequences don't really exist, and to some extent can't really exist. So you end up with this artificial system of saying, well, we've got armistice zones, and it's a highly secure system, but not at Grim Hex, and all of these kind of compromises because everybody's cooped up together.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a sliding scale on player opinion in that a lot of people feel the way that you feel, but at the same time, if you spent 20 minutes preparing, you would feel worse than if you spent 5 minutes preparing. And if you haven't been attacked in 3 months, you might not feel as bad as if you get attacked every week. And there's also the fact that that person already got to have their fun. They got to attack you. Yeah, they'll end up in prison, but they still got to ruin your game. And there's just so many conversations to have. There's so many edge cases that are possible. But in terms of the overall design, I do agree with you. And I hope that's the way they still continue to go, because ultimately it opens up a lot more gameplay when we have these, instead of an invisible wall, it's a gameplay created wall. You know, it's something that the game can then use to create more gameplay for other people. The example I always like to use is allowing a bounty hunter to get a license to carry in cities, so that they can still use their weapons in cities when other people can't, or allowing people to take those underground entrances or different types of entrances into cities to smuggle things in that maybe would have been just artificially blocked by an armistice zone. Those kinds of things, I think, allow the game to breathe a lot more, but they also offer a lot more opportunities for people to take advantage of them.
So I think I would be mindful to be even more liberal than that. I would let people have their weapons and be able to fire them in cities. But like you say, I would expect there to be, in highly patrolled cities, I'd expect there to be a law against carrying. And so if you pull out a weapon, you're breaking the law. And there's going to be enforcers around to make sure that happens. And if you're really quick, you might get a shot off. But hey, that's another law broken. And you could then match consequences to how seriously you want to treat that. So if you pull out a weapon in New Babbage and shoot somebody, right, brand new player, that you pull out your weapon and you shoot them, in my mind, I would lean towards letting you do that, but I'd also give you a very heavy Klesher sentence that you have to live out to discourage that kind of stuff in future. And by the way, I would see something like Klesher as being very different from a, hey, you went to Klesher, but give it an hour and you'll be out. I think I would have consequences that, from a data-led approach, really penalize the behavior that you don't want, lightly penalize the stuff that is kind of okay, so that you could still have a criminal gameplay loop where if, I don't know, you pirated an NPC on the edge of Stanton, oh, that's naughty, you'll get a criminal sentence, here's 5 minutes in Klesher, but you shot a new player point blank in a starting city, hey, that's a serious offense, you're going to get a long time and there's no easy way out of it. Suddenly having more of those consequence-based situations is going to really force people to think carefully about what they want to do.
You'd have to be real. You'd have to have some real intense warnings, I think, so that beginners don't find themselves accidentally getting themselves in prison just from trying out key bindings in that first day. Because
that's easy to do.
Yeah,
that is easy to do. You have it so that you've got somebody equipping a weapon in one of those zones. You've got a big Moby Glass warning that pops up that says, warning, warning, you are in an armistice or a lawful patrolled zone. If you continue with this action, you will go to jail.
Those are the kinds of gamified features that we just haven't seen in the game that can explain a lot of the stuff that they are doing that might seem a little bit cumbersome. But all of that doesn't really, and I think a lot of the reason we haven't seen that is because the game's stability has been such a problem. The development, the ability, the overhead to include a lot of that stuff, from the AI security to just more locations with different security levels into the game. And that's another thing that I think has frustrated players a lot, is the stability of this game. And many are wondering, when the heck is it going to get better? Or when are they going to start bug fixing? When are they going to make it so that I can actually log into this game every week and have a good time? What do you say to that? When do you think?
So the first thing I say to that, I have to be very fair to a lot of people over at the developers that work very hard. They do a lot of bug fixing. They probably do more bug fixing than anything else. I think actually it might have been your stream where you were going through and just showing from 2023 the number of teams working on things, and the single biggest item on there was bug fixing.
Yeah,
right?
like 42 teams dedicated to, well, not dedicated, but have bug fixing included in their workload.
Exactly, right? So there is a huge amount of bug fixing that does take place that I think we need to acknowledge. That said, there are clearly a number of bugs in the game, some of which have been in the game for a while. I think there is a balance with this stuff. Would I rather that people spend absolutely ages perfectly polishing what we have now, or would I rather we got new features implemented and probably new bugs, and they kind of fix the major game-breaking stuff, but keep the ball rolling forward? I think I'd probably rather the latter. I'd probably rather that game development continued, the game kept moving forward, and that they fixed the really important bugs, but the more important focus was on introducing new features. But with any of this stuff, there's a balance, right? I think we're at the stage now where people treat the PU as a game. Certainly I do. I treat it as a live game, and it needs to be relatively playable for that to be the case. I don't need it to be perfect. I don't need it to be bug-free, because I would much rather see progress on things that I'm waiting for to be added to the game. But I do think that the focus of bug fixing needs to be on keeping that PU experience relatively playable for the important gameplay loops.
Agreed. There is a pretty common take that they should stop adding anything new to the game and just focus on bug fixing. And that's what I was going to ask about next from you. But I mean, what is a clear problem you see with that? Why would you say that's not the way to go?
Very simply because of the problem we started talking on this podcast about all the promises of stuff that people are waiting for that they're still waiting for. We are in a lull right now in Star Citizen. Part of that is because of the summer. Part of that is because people are waiting for the next big patch. So even if what we had in game right now was absolutely perfect, 0 bugs, imagine, I think there would still be a lull because people are waiting for the next thing. So I think for all those people who are waiting for their favorite ship, or they're waiting for better medical gameplay, or they're waiting for repair gameplay, like, I think those people that are in the waiting list would probably feel, hey, maybe don't go down that bug fixing approach, maybe keep the ball moving and try and keep things on the road until then.
Yeah, there's the amount of features we're still missing, even beyond just what they've promised. We wouldn't even be able to fully repair our ships if they stopped development now. We wouldn't be able to trade items with other players. Quantum travel would not allow us to quantum travel in any direction, which would hamper exploration. Base building wouldn't give any reason for resources. Like, there are a lot of things that would just not matter at all if they stopped development at this point.
Exactly. And you have to acknowledge, if you do want to keep the game moving forward, if you do want those extra functions, those extra features, those extra ships, that is going to introduce bugs. That's the nature of it. You change something and something unexpected happens, that's your bug. So I think I'm quite pragmatic about understanding that there is already a huge amount of work that goes on fixing this stuff. I do think we need to keep the PU relatively stable, relatively playable, but I would much rather see the focus on continuing to deliver the features that people are waiting for, rather than saying, hey, what we've got now is perfect. Because I think what we've got now is pretty good, by the way. I play the game every week to play the game, not necessarily because I'm waiting for something, even though if I wanted to list it, I'm waiting for plenty. But even I accept I would much rather see progress than have a perfect polished article with what we have now.
But there is something to be said about stability in general. Like you said, it's good to focus on the bug fixing and at least get things that are game breaking out of the way. And it's hard to play a game as a real game when you are so worried about the little things like ships blowing up or desync, especially desync. That tends to be a huge problem. But also like not really having an MMO feel, in the sense that AI don't function correctly. There aren't that many players that are around to actually take part in the gameplay stuff that you're doing. Like we even see with global events, when a global event is running, either a lot of people are at a global event, which leaves the rest of the world feeling a little empty, or not many people show up to the global event because there just aren't enough people in that said server. What are some of the big things that you have noticed them talking about, or that they have explicitly said are supposed to be helping with that sort of all-around stability and helping the game move forward in that sense?
I think this is a much better question for you than for me, because you've got all of the facts and figures to hand. Look, I think we'll get there with that stuff. Again, it depends on what your priorities are. I really don't care that much right now about having loads of NPCs around doing things, looking busy. I don't care that much that I walk past an NPC stood on the chair every time that I walk into Spaceport, because that's not the stuff that I'm passionate about or care about. For me, that's relatively minor. Again, for me, actually, I'm very comfortable when there aren't many other players around, because when I'm out and about in the verse, if I see another player, I'm immediately suspicious of them. I'm like, what are they doing?
On guard, yeah.
Having weapons, I'm going to fly away. But equally, if your focus is on that kind of big social scene, or if you're really interested in conflict, then you do want to be out and about and seeing other players. So I think there are probably different perspectives there. There are some things that I think are on the drawing board that are designed to help with that. So you talk a lot on your streams about Tony Z and Quanta, and some of that stuff that will, in theory, help drive more of a simulated economy. I think that will naturally channel players to different places when they work. So it doesn't necessarily fix the problem of the scale of the verse, but you concentrate players in similar places. I think that would help. And to be fair, you said that when they've got events running, that's kind of what happens, is people concentrate into specific areas. I also think some of the server meshing tech, in theory, should help with that, because suddenly one of the big challenges that they've had with this engine they've got is the number of players they can fit in an instance. And the smaller you can make those instances but seamlessly join them together, you limit yourself a lot less. So I think that would help, but you probably know more about the tech side of it than I do.
Well, I think server meshing has been the big wall that has blocked progress for a long time now, and persistent entity streaming also being a part of that and a big prerequisite to that. We can see how gameplay has started to come in more after that kind of stuff has been developed. Salvage, the actual inventory systems, the cargo hauling, physicalizing cargo, all that stuff seems like it had a lot depending on these major tech hurdles getting completed. And I think we'll see similar development after server meshing comes in, not in the sense that suddenly everything's going to explode and the dam is going to break and yada, yada, yada. But it does allow the company to focus more on the things that I think matter to players, including stability. Like you said, being able to break each of these instances, or like the game that you're playing essentially, into multiple servers instead of just one, allows for a lot of that load to go away. Theoretically, it should make it so that the FPS server is, or the server FPS is running faster, that entities can load in better because they're being handled by multiple servers rather than just one stretched to its limits, and that things like connectivity, hopefully, can also work better. We've seen this in the tech preview tests when they've run the server meshing tests. I didn't get to take much part in them, but I know that they did help with the game performance a lot. And there are some caveats to that. But I do believe that server meshing can be a big heap of that stability issue that people have problems with. I remember when we got 3.0, changed over a lot of the systems with how this game works, and it was an absolute dumpster fire for like 3 quarters. It was awful. FPS was low for almost everybody. A lot of the problems we were having with the game, you just could not get around. And then they brought in object container streaming, and suddenly things started to really pick up. And then we saw more kinds of small tech advancements like that helped in different categories. And I think server meshing, while maybe not right away in 4.0, but again, just like 3.0, as it continues to get ironed out and things get added on, I do think that a lot of the stability people have problems with will start to come to fruition with server meshing.
I think there's an element of what you're doing in game and your own view about this stuff as well. So for me, what I tend to do in game now is mining or salvage. That's kind of how I spend most of my time. I would say probably 9 times out of 10, I can log into the PU and do that with no issues, or with no game-breaking issues. So there might be like a little bit of lag, a little bit of delay, a little bit of latency, but for the most part, I can get on, do what I want to do, and get back home having done that. So I would say it's very few and far between now where I have an issue that completely stops me from doing what I wanted to do in that game session. And to be fair, usually if I am in that situation, I can server hop, and server hopping fixes it. Mm-hmm. So in the grand scheme of Star Citizen, for somebody that's been playing for many, many years, what we have now is probably one of the most stable iterations that we've ever had. So I know it's not perfect. I know we're talking about where we'd like to be, but if you look back at how far we've come, actually what we've got now is pretty decent. And depending on what you want to do in game, most of the time, I think you'd be able to actually get on, experience that. I think there are some gameplay loops that are harder hit than others. So for example, if you're a bunker runner, I think that is much more dependent on the stability of the individual server you're on versus a cargo hauler or a salvager. So there are going to be different experiences depending on what you like to do in game. But I would say in the main, I felt this has probably been one of the more stable cycles. But I'm happy to be proved wrong on that.
I think you're right. There are problems that have been worse, especially in, like you said, certain types of gameplay, fast-paced stuff, low flying and FPS combat. But in terms of overall stability, yeah, it definitely, I mean, it's been rough. Like, it's saying something to say that this is one of the more stable experiences we've had in Star Citizen. It's definitely the most fulfilling experience we've had in the sense that we have more gameplay. I think a lot of people forget that before 3.18, we didn't have salvage. Mining was not in a very good place. It's still rough, but it was significantly worse before they did the resource rebalancing and added a couple more resources and changed the way that some of the components worked. But there was no salvage. There was a less fulfilling mining situation. There was basically no cargo hauling situation. The FPS experiences were much more limited than they are now in terms of the locations you could go to, and like, you know, derelict outposts and stuff, just they didn't exist. Before 3.18, it was a different game than it is now. And that's not, it's a little bit hyperbolic. I think that the time it changed is longer than that, but it's easy to forget just how poor the game was a while ago. I mean, it's only been 5 years, and that sounds like a really long time. It is, but it's only been about 4 or 5 years since we've been able to buy ships in game. Like, there was a time when you couldn't even buy ships in the game, and that would be unacceptable at this point.
Yeah, it's wild. And again, you look back over time. I don't tend to do really long gameplay sessions. I'm usually on for 2 or 3 hours. I can't remember the last time I had a 30k. Maybe it was last month, maybe it was the month before. There was a time where you couldn't go an hour or two without getting a 30k error and getting booted off and having to go back and start from scratch. And on the occasions I remember over the last month when I have had issues, I remember a terrible issue where it kind of said server waiting or something like that, big white text on the screen. I've not had that one before for a while. I gave it a minute and it fixed itself. It recovered itself. So I was exactly where I should have been in my ship with all my stuff, and it managed to fix itself. And yes, I have to accept that there are glitches, there are things that interfere with gameplay, but I also have to give credit to how far we have come and how relatively stable it is now versus how it used to be.
Yeah, that actually reminds me, there was also a point, I think it was in 2020 it changed, when we had a new wipe, a progress wipe, in everything that involved your character in the game, every single quarter. You remember that?
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
Oof.
We're at a stage now where I think any sort of wipes are pretty much intentional for a purpose rather than simply because, hey, we're releasing a new patch and when we do that, everything wipes.
Yeah.
So I think there will still be necessary wipes as part of the patch cycle going forward, but it's almost like a checkbox that somebody in the design team will say, actually, this is going to need a wipe because we need to reset alpha UEC or because we need to reset reputation in order to fully test this. I think that's a great place to be in, where that is a conscious decision to be discussed amongst the community and the developers rather than oh yeah, this is what happens when we release a patch. So it's another good point.
Yeah. And I think just like they have realized that is necessary for a game environment, especially what people expect nowadays, they also can start to put more focus on the small things in progression, like you said, the component differences, the weapon differences, the balance of how things work, or your reputation gain, the money you get for missions, the missions available. Those sorts of things, I think, are really going to help players better just get more entertainment out of this game and feel like it matters more, feel like their time is more respected and they're getting more out of it. And ultimately, that brings me back to the real question of this podcast and why we're here. Do you feel like players are right in their frustrations surrounding this game, taking into account all of the things we talked about today, from stability to time sinks to what they're focused on in marketing, all of this? Do you think that they need to pay attention to frustration, or just keep going along with what they're doing?
Yes, I think players are right. There's the old adage that a customer is always right, and ultimately players are the paying customer. I think for many of us, we should encourage each other to be pragmatic and not expect the world. So I think there is a role that we all have to play in trying to say, well, let's just take a step back, as we have done today, and just really think about this stuff and reflect. But ultimately, CitizenCon last year for me was the catalyst for a lot of this frustration right now, because they said, hey, we listened to you. We took the feedback from previous CitizenCons, and you said you don't want to see stuff that's years and years in the future, and you really want to ground in what's going to be happening soon. And this stuff we're all aiming to deliver before the next CitizenCon. And then people were like, oh, that's a bit of a change. I better expect this stuff before the next CitizenCon then. That's fantastic. That's what we've been saying all along.
Yep.
And then here you are 10 months down the line, and people are going, well, I've been stung again, haven't I? I've fallen for it again. Another CitizenCon with a lot of hype. I think there's a partial responsibility on us as the player base to try not to hype this game. I've been around for 10 years. I've fallen into the trap of being super excited for all the stuff we're going to get. And I'm kind of now in a place where I want to say, I'm enjoying the game as it is. It ain't perfect. There's a lot still to go. There's a lot that I'm waiting for, but I'm just going to focus on what we have here and now and not get overly excited until we've got stuff in our hands. So I think I try to encourage people to have that kind of an attitude, be very cynical, be very skeptical, because then you're less likely to get super excited about something that will inevitably get delayed. But I also think there's a big responsibility on the game studio to say, let's really set the right tone, the right messaging here. If we're going to say this is stuff you can expect in the next year, we need to be really confident. Or if for whatever reason things are pushed back, we need to be really honest quite early on to say this is a significant delay because of X, not, hey, it's going to be a few weeks, but we're talking weeks, not months. So I think the players are right. I think the player perspective is understandable. I would try and temper an element of caution into that. But I think the people that do feel frustrated, I do feel some sympathy with them too.
Absolutely. I think we're all a little frustrated to certain degrees. Like you said, CitizenCon last year presented us with a lot to look, a lot to digest. And then the messaging even going beyond CitizenCon towards the end of the year and opening up this year was all very expectation setting. And understandably, game development has its problems and its delays and its issues. But everybody is acting based on the expectations that are set by CIG. And whether they can stick to those or not, they need to help us out with the messaging on what we can expect on a shorter term basis. So hopefully in the next couple of months, we do see some good communication around that. Hopefully this CitizenCon, despite what folks might think, we can see a 4.0, maybe a 4.1 by the end of the year, or 4.0.1, or whatever combination of numbers it is. But I do hope that we still get to see a decent amount of features and some stability stuff that happens that can leave players feeling a little bit more satisfied about this year. Either way, Farrister,
You're very, very optimistic.
I'm incredibly optimistic. Again, don't set your expectations on that. Just some hopes.
I have to say, as much as you and I have talked about some of our frustrations and some of the frustrations amongst the players, I imagine a lot of this is quite frustrating for a lot of people over at CIG as well, who are genuinely trying to make a great game here. And with the best will in the world, you can't plan for everything. So sometimes you can say, we're working on this before the next CitizenCon, and then something comes up that you were not expecting. That must be really frustrating for them as well. I don't think, as much as you read the conspiracy theories online, I don't think anybody there wants to keep development of this game going indefinitely. I think people really want to deliver. They really want to get stuff in player hands, but it has to be working. So I can imagine it's a frustrating situation for everybody.
Yeah. Of all the people who are annoyed with it, it's got to be the people who are working on it. Just because they don't say that, I mean, generally you don't say that about your own work, especially when it's your employer. But I imagine the devs definitely want, especially the ones who are held back by the tech, like they want to show the cool stuff that they've been working on and they can't, and that must suck.
Absolutely.
Farrister, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Amazing takes, my friend. I do hope that this episode was a good listen or a good watch if you're on YouTube for folks to get a little bit more perspective on this, and maybe hear some things that you didn't know, or hear some opinions from, I mean, not us, but opinions we've heard that we are trying to bring into this podcast to let people know how everybody is viewing how the development is going, where the frustration is coming from, why it's there, and why maybe it shouldn't be as much or should be more than it is. Thank you so much for joining me, man. Can you let everybody know where they can find your own beautiful content? I love the videos you make.
Thank you very much. I'm over on YouTube at youtube.com/Farrister.
And do you do streaming?
I wish I could. I, number one, don't have the skill set for it, and number two, don't have enough spare time for it. So no, pretty much just the YouTube videos. But I do tend to watch a lot of streams, so you'll often find me active in other people's streams, just kind of listening along, watching along.
How do you feel when people call you a streamer then?
Well, people can say what they want about me, can't they?
I just always find that funny when people call anybody who works in any form of video online a streamer. I imagine you prefer, YouTuber. I do personally, but
Honestly, I feel a bit of imposter syndrome for that as well. Like when people call me YouTuber or content creator. I mean, I suppose technically I am a content creator, but to me, I'm just a guy who makes a couple of space videos about a game he enjoys every single week. So
Hey, I mean, it's
I see
content.
myself a bit differently.
I think anybody who's putting out blogs, pictures, posts, polls, news, whatever it is you're putting out, if people are receiving it, you're creating content for folks, and it's okay to call yourself that. It's take that and run with it. It's not a bad thing.
Will do.
Either way, thank you again so much for joining me, and thank you everybody for listening or watching. If you enjoy these podcasts and you'd like to be able to get them on your audio platforms, we are available on all major platforms, and there's no ads on there. They are supported by the supporters we have on YouTube channel members, which you can join here on Space Tomato 2. Over on Space Tomato, you could become a Patreon member. Either way, whatever you choose, you help us to keep this podcast going. You also get exclusive videos every month and the chance to get your referral code in our referral code randomizer, which, can help with the, you guys know how that works. Anyways, appreciate y'all joining in. I hope you got something from this one, and I'll see you all next week.